Hello there, my name is Rosie Goldsmith and welcome to Rock Talks, our new conversation series featuring literary rock stars from both Romania and Britain. These live conversations are part of our 4-week literature festival, Romania Rocks, brought to you by the Romanian Cultural Institute in London and the European Literature Network, ELNet. We're halfway through the festival now, so stay tuned. We've got 2 more weeks of riveting encounters. Now, the idea behind Rock Talks is to bring together some of Romania's greatest living writers with their equally brilliant British counterparts. Writers we think will have something in common, even though they may never have met and come from completely different cultures. You can watch all of our Rock Talk interviews on our YouTube channel on the RCI and ELNet websites, featuring writers such as Ian Rankin with Bogdan Teodorescu, David Mitchell with Andrei Codrescu, Fiona Sampson with Anna Blandiana, and there are many more to come. Our Rock Talks last 1 hour. Tonight, we're being live streamed on several platforms, including that of the Romanian cultural magazine, Observator Cultural. So welcome to all of you. Welcome to everyone. If you'd like to ask questions tonight, please submit them via our Facebook chat streams in the first 45 minutes so that we can choose the best questions, your best questions to ask at the end. All our festival events are free and they're all filmed by London Video Stories so that you can watch them again and again on our YouTube channels. You can also buy the books that we're discussing from the dedicated independent booksellers listed on our websites, and you can download a free copy of the first ever magazine of Romanian prose and poetry in English, The Romanian Riveter, featuring, amongst many writers, Magda Cârneci herself. Tonight, it's the turn of 2 very special women, Magda Cârneci and Deborah Levy, both poets, novelists, essayists. Magda's also an art historian and Deborah's a playwright. And actually, they're both so active across so many different genres that instead of me reading out the long list of their achievements, I do beg you to read their full biographies on our website so we can spend this very valuable time hearing from them. Now, I'm lucky enough to have known Deborah and her work a little longer than Magda, but I'm already in love with Magda's poetry, thanks to the English translations of A Deafening Silence and a sneak preview of her first novel, Femme, coming out in 2021. And Deborah and I last met, I don't know if you remember, Deborah, exactly a year ago, just after the launch of your great novel, The Man Who Saw Everything. And then you've got the 3rd volume of your living autobiography, Real Estate, coming out also next spring. So much to talk to you about, and you have much more in common than you'll ever know. But I want to ask you both, first of all, where you are now, physically and creatively in this sort of crazy COVID time. And you both write so many different things, but has lockdown narrowed or broadened your focus? Deborah first, where are you?
I am in Athens. I'm in an Airbnb. As you can see,
yeah.
There's nothing on the wall. There's a black lamp. I've been finishing a book in Greece, and Athens locks down tomorrow, and I needed to get off the island before all the boats stopped, and I was stranded there. So I'm here for a night, and I think that we're supposed to say that lockdown, that writers are supposed to say, that lockdown is no different from the solitude of writing life, that we're used to isolation. But I don't feel like that at all. I feel a bit like a fish stranded on a beach, and the sea has fled. A bit like that. I mean, now and again, I understand that it's a very interesting time to record because, for many reasons, but what interests me is that coronavirus is centered on the body, and so that we are fearful of the symptoms that we might have. Like everyone I speak to says, oh, I really thought I was ill the other day because I had hiccups. So our relationship with our bodies is quite interesting to me, and the relationship with masks, because in a way I think that that we are more in our masks, that we sort of understand that there's a lot of human turbulence under the mask, and I guess human turbulence is my subject. So those two things interest me, but I don't find isolation the same thing as solitude at all.
No. And human turbulence, I mean, that is a very good link to Magda's writing as well. But Magda, you're in Bucharest at the moment. Tell us a little bit about where you are, if you like, spiritually, physically, mentally at the moment. Have you been writing about this time as well, sort of marking it occasionally in the same way that Deborah has?
Yes, I'm in my apartment in Bucharest. I'm isolated and alone, and I feel comfortable in this way. And for me, the lockdown was an opportunity to rethink some parts of my life, and to try to order my priorities, and to try to see whether or not the world will change in the future. At the beginning of this lockdown, I was convinced that the world will change a lot, and that there will be extraordinary effects that will arrive. And people were so excited by this new situation in which they were. So I was also excited, so to say, even if it was really difficult to move or to get things to eat and so on. But afterwards, I've noticed in my being that I got accustomed with this tension and with this stress. And I wrote some texts about this. I mean, especially articles for journals and magazines. And I translated them also into French. I published also in French. And now I'm trying to transform this experience into poems, into short poems. But you know, almost everybody around me does the same. I mean, my friends, writers, appear on Facebook or on Zoom, on different kind of long distance discussion. And I realized that in spite of this isolation, we share a common space, which is this virtual space in which we are now, all of us, only feel comfortable finally. I mean, what I mean is that there are also positive aspects of this situation, which we should accept. I mean, we don't have to be negative about everything, because a change is a change, and we have to accept it, and to see whether this will bring some modifications in our life. For example, I found a short movie by Arundhati Roy on internet, and she said that this pandemic is a gateway, a portal. And I was so surprised. Why is it a portal or a gateway? And she said that because the world won't be the same afterwards, and we have to accept this and to be happy in a way that the world will change, because not everything was good in our previous life. And I think Deborah will agree that at a certain moment we were so stressed, everything was so accelerated, that we in a way we had lost control on our lives. We did so many things in all directions that our inner life had to suffer. And now that we have to slow down a little bit the rhythm of our life, I think this is a good opportunity for our inner being to come up and see, here I am.
Do you agree with that, Deborah?
No.
No.
But if anything, my inner life was in better shape before coronavirus. Why that is, Magda, I don't know. But somehow that acceleration, which I understand your point, and also the essay that you referred to, Arundhati, where she framed this incredible metaphor that the pandemic could be a portal to another world, and will we drag the filthy old rivers from the old world into another world? I mean, it is the most astute piece of writing for myself that's come out of the pandemic. But I find that my inner life is fractured, I find my concentration not so, I have a steely focus. I am someone who really does, but actually at the moment I don't. I find myself unable to concentrate. On the other hand, now and again, I did finish a book. And now and again, something comes to the surface, Magda, that I don't think would have formed itself in the same way before living with this great uncertainty of that we're living in now.
I think what's interesting for me is that you both have always touched on your inner lives, and you both seem very still in your writing as well. So it's not for me as if you've ever neglected your inner lives. In fact, that's what you both have in common, I think. So obviously something different is happening now. I think that restlessness and the feeling of being unsettled and disturbed is something I can really relate to, Deborah. It's just there's too much uncertainty, I think. But in your poetry, Magda, I'm thinking, because overwhelmingly you've written poetry, I must say that, reading your poetry really touched me so deeply, and I could, thinking that only somebody who has really a rich inner life could write poetry like yours. And the same with your novel as well, too. It's which I've had and Deborah and I both had the great luck to be able to read ahead of publication. But this, I think, this is probably leading to me asking you both a question about these landmark times in our lives. When you were writing in 1989, Magda, when the Romanian Revolution happened, and you were writing before, under completely different circumstances, under an authoritarian, cruel communist state, and then after, how differently did you write in that pre-landmark time as opposed to afterwards? And 1989 must have changed everything, but how different was your writing before then?
Well, I have to admit that there was not such a big difference between what I wrote before and after 89, because writing is my private realm where I am with the essence of myself, so to say. And I write mostly about my inner states, about what is possible to feel and to think with our body and with our mind. And I started as a more prosaic poet at the beginning of the 80s with my generation, which was a way to confront the communist ideology of the regime. But afterwards, because everything was so poor and so bad around, I decided to go inside, to retire a little bit from the outer world and to go within and to discover myself there. And many things happened to me because of this. I had all kinds of states and dreams and daydreams and strange experiences which convinced me that this inner life is real and strong and has its own metabolism, so to say. And I started to write down in my diary about all these states. And my poetry also suffered a little bit from this, in the sense that I gave up reflecting the outer world most completely. And I went to a more more concentrated kind of poetry. And the volume you mentioned, the Deafening Silence, was written in those years. I mean, it was like a cry of solitude in which I was living. But I accepted it in a way. I couldn't do any otherwise, of course. It was difficult to live in those days. But it's a complicated process, because each of us has to find the balance between the outer world and the inner world. And this is very personal. And this depends also on time, as you said before. And when I discovered this inner world, which was so rich, I became less interested in the outer world. In poetry, I mean, in poetry and in writing. On the other side, I became more active as a social person. And then the revolution came on December 89. And I have to say that I participated actively in this revolution by chance. By chance. I had friends who brought me there, and I was there in the front, in the first lines of the battle. And then in the 90s, I had to be more involved in political life, cultural life. I assumed some positions. I published a lot of journalism and so on. So I didn't write at that time because it was not possible. Time was not fit for this kind of retirement into an inner realm. And only afterwards, later, much later, I could find again the silence of my world, and I could write the novel Femme, for example, which is, as you know, mostly focused on inner states and visions.
And being a woman, the body, the biological, spiritual, physical aspects, mental aspects of being a woman. I mean, it is an extraordinary novel. I know it was published a few years ago in Romanian, so it's just been translated now, which is the normal hiatus, unfortunately. But at least everybody will get to read it. But you did, as you say, you took on many public positions and you are a very well-known public figure in Romania. So because you were a member of the European Cultural Parliament, you were president of PEN Romania, and numerous other things as well. I think you're also the editor of an art magazine, I think still, and you're a translator, and you do all kinds of things. Do you find, before I ask Deborah a similar question about this public and personal persona, if you like, do you find that the two clash still, or are you deliberately separating them off when you're writing and when you're a public figure?
Well, this is a good question. I ask always, I ask myself in which way to combine these two spheres. And usually I keep them separated. I mean, I'm a very active person in the outer world. I assume positions because it is necessary, not because I love them very much, but I live in a country which is not so settled as England, for example. Everything is unstable.
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. It's not settled.
Yes, but on the other side, I keep at this inner world, which is so special for every one of us, and which has to be protected. And this is a point which I want to underline, and I think that Deborah will agree, because I found a quotation in her writing which I loved a lot, and let me read it now. Deborah says, "If the mind were not able to roam into the more radical dimensions of consciousness, life would be quite dull." And this is remarkable. I mean, this is my program of life, my program of writing, so to say. And I think that Deborah's novels are about this.
I mean, Deborah, just a quick introduction to people if they haven't, read your novels. But Deborah's written 7 novels, and I won't go through all of them because you can look them up on Wikipedia and also on our websites. But over several years, and then you've also written plays as well, and adapted plays. You've written essays, and everything is just wonderful short stories. And the most recent novel, the one I want to just briefly mention, is The Man Who Saw Everything, which you published last year, which is actually remarkable because it's also about 1989. It's about that period of time in the GDR. It's set in the GDR, Magda. I don't know whether you've had the chance to read that one, but it's about this pivotal year again. And your interest, Deborah, obviously in these ideologies, political ideologies, oppression, and so on, and how that changes people. Why were you so interested in 1989?
First of all, thank you, Magda, for that quote, because I think it sort of sums up the point of writing for me. So I was going to say something really odd that I hadn't thought before when we were talking about inner and outer lives, but there is no inner life without an outer life. So the two flow into each other, and certainly it's that braiding, that plaiting of the two that that is what The Man Who Saw Everything is about. So I wanted to look at create quite a vain minor historian, a freakishly beautiful man, androgynous man, a bisexual man, who has a communist father, an authoritarian British father, Jewish father as well, who they fight about masculinity, father and son, in the home. And the father kind of sets up this totalitarian regime in the home. And his son, Saul Adler, goes off to the GDR in 1988. And I wanted to see what happens if you put if you put this beautiful man with a very different sort of masculinity into that culture, what would happen? And I wanted to look at surveillance. I wanted Saul Adler to kind of, in fact, I've got it here. He imagines that, so he both imagines that he's being surveyed, and he's also, and he is in reality being surveyed, but he's also surveilling himself. He's scrutinizing himself. So he says, the sound of a typewriter was going crazy in my head. I heard the keys hammering onto a thin sheet of paper placed in its carriage. It infuriated me. So I added a thought crime to my thoughts for the typewriter to record. Okay, I said to the typewriter, let me help you file your report. The GDR will lose legitimacy with its people due to extreme measures of coercion by authoritarian old men, men like my father, who built a wall between us. The wall was his masculinity. I jumped the wall and landed safely with a thump on the other side, having avoided my father's dogs, his mines, his guards, his barbed wire, and everything else he put in my way to keep me under his thumb. So I'm not writing about the GDR in the way that has often been written about. I'm writing about it through this lens. And I also, at a time of Britain separating from the European Union, the time of Brexit, this was all going on when I was writing it. So if we were to look at restricted freedom of movement, I don't think anyone who's experienced it would actually vote for it. So this was also a point that I was exploring in The Man Who Saw Everything.
I think that book for me is, in a way that I experienced Eastern Europe also at very close quarters as a journalist. Deborah and I never went through what you went through, Magda, in the same way. We have tried with all our hearts and minds to imagine it and to empathize and to understand. But I wonder for you, living through it and writing about it, how difficult has it been for you to actually emerge from that and to, if you like, liberate yourself from that?
Well, yes, this is a good question. It took me time to separate from this recent past and to look at it with calm and quietly. And for example, but at the same time, I felt the need to understand what happened. And in this regard, I chose a theme for my PhD thesis, which I took in Paris, and the topic of my thesis was visual arts during the communist regime. Mm. And I was asked, why did I choose this topic? And I said, because I need to do it, because otherwise I would feel like nothing, like as if nothing will remain from my previous life. And so I wrote a book, which is now published in Romanian and in French, and will be also in English. It's like a manual, like a
manual, yes.
Manual, like a manual. Edited and re-edited because the students use it very much. So this was a way for me to say adieu, to say goodbye to this period of my life when I was very young, in fact, and to go further. Regarding my poetry, I didn't feel the need to transfer this experience into verses. As I said before, I keep poetry a little bit separate and next to ordinary life. For me, poetry is a way of escaping a little bit from this common everyday life with its constraints. But I wrote only some short stories about communism, about my experience, about the revolution and so on. And only now after 30 years, I am trying to put all this together and to build a book. But what is interesting is that many foreign writers started to write about Romanian revolution very quickly after it. And I met French writers and poets who came there in this respect, and there were also British and German, and they did it for us in a way. It took 20 years for the Romanian writers to approach this topic. And now there's like a fashion among younger writers, younger prose writers, to write about a period they didn't know, they didn't live, but which is attracting for them because exactly because they didn't live it. And so now we have a lot of novels about this period, which is a good sign, in my opinion. In this way, we approach normalcy, so to say.
Magda, I understand that very well, and I can't wait to read your PhD thesis as well. And what you're saying reminds me of a writer I very much admire, a British writer called J.G. Ballard. And he was talking about his childhood. He said it took me 25 years to forget it, and 25 years to remember it. And I sort of think that all writing is somewhere in that zone, in forgetting and remembering, really. And the forgetting, and there's no sort of essential truth to either of them. Freud also said this about our families. He said we spend the rest of our, we all have a family or something like it, and we spend the rest of our life getting over it. And that, in a way, is also the point of writing, not to tell one story, as I know you know, because I've read Femme, which I think is a really extraordinary, superb piece of work. I'm still thinking about it. I've read it. I've read much of it today in Athens. You have a line in it in which the female protagonist is sitting down, and an image, I think it's a photograph. She remembers a photograph, and I think say that it's that these images crash into her, so that she becomes a sort of movie theater. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So true. You know, that's a poet. That's a poet writing prose, finding these distilled, quiet, very full images. It's really incredible.
You know, Deborah, I think you do that with your living autobiographies as well, though, because, I mean, you're talking about similar things in a way, because you're also marking down what you're going through, or your life, in a similar way. Obviously, you haven't been through a revolution, but you've certainly been through a lot in your life. And you know, things I don't want to know, the cost of living, and then real estate coming up next year. These are also arresting novels of yourself, of your own life, and they're written by somebody with such a beautiful lyrical sensibility. So you are similar in that way. I think.
Yes, but I think that I have a poetic structure. I'm a poet. And Deborah is more like a prose writer, and I admire this in her case, because I cannot do maybe this kind of refined writing which rebuilt a world. And you know, I read 2 of her novels, translated into Romanian, Hot Milk and Swimming Home. And what is amazing for me, it is how she gives a body to an intrigue, to a story which contains several levels of psychological depth through minute, every day by day habits, deeds, facts, and small experiences. And finally, you realize that out of this, so to say, ordinary lives, something very profound arises. And I want to ask Deborah if she uses her own biography in her writing, because I know writing is finally a combination of autobiography and fiction. How much does she use her real life in her fiction?
Wow, good question.
Something I was thinking about today, Magda, because you know, I have written what I've called 3 living autobiographies. What I mean by that is that they are written in the storm of life. They're not written it with looking back on a life, being wise and lofty and looking back and having with nostalgia. They're written in the present tense, but in a way, I think my novels are more autobiographical than my living biography.
Wow.
It's a strange thing to say, It might not be entirely true, but let's just have this thought experiment tonight with you, Magda. Such a superb writer, it's such an honor to be speaking to you, and I wish we could raise a glass together and speak nose to nose. But so what was my point? Oh yeah, well, there's a sort of part of me in every single character in my fiction, the male characters, the female characters. But what I think we share, and there's a lot that we don't share, we don't have to, we can celebrate our difference too, is that we, tell me if you agree, we have to embody ideas, we have to embody theories, we have to embody arguments. Otherwise, the writing is very dry. Otherwise, the writing doesn't breathe, it doesn't have a heartbeat, doesn't blink. Obviously, we could reach for our books and find places to sort of illustrate that idea. But that's the thing, is that for myself, I chase my arguments by embodying them in objects, in everyday behavior. I have no problem with somebody having big existential thoughts on Monday morning and taking out the garbage in the afternoon. They're interesting to me, equally interesting to me. And then the other thing, which again is very apparent to me in your writing, and this is hard to accept, you know, is that when I read, I have to be interested in the writer's mind. I have to be interested in how that writer thinks. It doesn't matter what their story is. It doesn't matter how beautiful the lines are in a poem. If I'm not interested in how they think in the mind itself, it doesn't matter to me their technique, their skill, how many degrees they've got, or their life experience. And I find that in every line of yours that I read, I am really fascinated. You hold my attention. I'm interested in your mind. I'm interested in how you think and what you pay attention to. So in this sense, I'm very pleased, Rosie, that you brought us together here tonight.
Well, it's when I hear you two speak that I know this is the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do. And I think that there's something that strikes me as well when I listen to both of you and when I read your work, both of you. You're both very visual writers. And I know that you know, Magda is an art historian, and Deborah writes a lot about art and has always been connected with art in some way. And I wonder to what extent you're aware of how visually you write and whether you do it even deliberately. Deborah first.
I've just been speaking so much. I think, Magda,
just on that one, because I was thinking it might sort of work.
Yes. Well, the image is everything for me. Because I have to see what I'm writing. I mean, I have to feel what I'm writing. Sometimes, actually, I think you might agree, sometimes we don't really know what it is we're reaching for when we write. So that's exciting too. It's not like you have clear feelings. You know, you sort of have to figure out what you feel about something. You write to figure out what you feel about something. But I taught writing at the Royal College of Art for 10 years, mostly in the animation department, but also students who wanted to use text in some way in photography and in visual culture generally. And what I really like about hanging out with visual artists is if you walk down the street, the visual artists, they go, oh, look at the drains in the pavement they made out of this material and they cut in this way. I don't think they've been put in the pavement right. Oh, look at those pipes. I think Rodin would have been interested in those pipes because, and this I find a very good break from words. Words, you know. So really my project is to use as fewer words as I can get away with, to just really, I don't really want to have a chat in my work. I want to have a conversation with my readers, but I don't really want to sort of pass the time, you know. So the image and cinema, which is why I was so taken with that image you had of all that photograph unleashing a flood, a cinema inside your female protagonist, who, by the way, writes a letter. This is Magda's book, writes a letter right at the start, telling a friend, shall we say, everything she's not going to write about, which is, or how she's not going to write, which is about 24-hour news media, about the next war, about the next car crash, about the next fashion. Is going to go slowly. It's just, am I right? I think that's a really good provocation because, you know.
Magda, over to you, because I think that is the perfect transition to this wonderful way you approach writing.
Yes, thank you, Deborah. It's wonderful what you said. Yes, I think that I was influenced by my job, my profession as an art critic. I had to write a lot about my colleagues' pieces of art, and often I had to add from myself to enhance a little bit, you know, the intensity of a work of art. And at a certain moment, I started to say, well, why do I do this for others instead of doing this for me? Because what is important for me is to have powerful images. This is a main point in my novel Femme. I want to offer strong images, irradiant images, which to shock or to influence or to stamp in a certain way the reader. And because I think that images are very important in our inner life. But as Deborah said, we are so overwhelmed with news and television and internet and so on that we do not, we have lost a kind of sensitivity for images. We just consume them. It's so fast, so too much. It's too much and too fast. And so the artist has the mission, I would say, to slow down this psychology, this collective and individual psychology, and to make us see what a real image is. Not all images are real, in my opinion, but they are strong and powerful and extraordinary and strange images. I give you an example because I think Deborah will like it. Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon, he's a realist painter in a way, but his images are so obsessional that you enter in his mind, in his world, and you are transported on another level, in another state of consciousness, so to say. And I have another example, which is a Romanian painter this time. His name is Adrian Ghenie, who has become very renowned now. He sells at astronomical prices. And in a way, he continues Francis Bacon's line, I think, but differently. and he starts from Guinea, starts from recent history, from the faces of Hitler, Goering, Lenin, or Ceausescu, and he does so strange compositions that take you out of your common understanding and feeling and judgment and so on, and puts you in another state of mind. And this is miraculous and mysterious at the same time. This is what I want. I want this mystery to come out of the writing, and I think it's possible.
It's wonderful. I mean, and in fact, interestingly, Magda, you probably know that in the review that was made of your poetry by Vesna Goldsworthy in the Riveter magazine, she actually described your poetry in this very magazine like a Francis Bacon painting. So I don't know whether you remember that, but I mean, that's really fascinating. And I wonder also just on art, whether for you both also art is signifies beauty. Because in all these terrible, of course it does for many of us, but in all these terrible events that are happening now in our lives and so on too, do you turn to art for beauty, or do you turn to writing, or what do you turn to? Deborah?
Oh, well, for me, it's music, actually. I play a lot of music when actually before I write. Sometimes just to get a tone. It's surprising things. So when I was writing Swimming Home, Magda, I was listening to Nirvana. I was listening to Smells Like Teen Spirit, because I got really interested in the way that Kurt Cobain sang hello, 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 as if he was kind of saying goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And there was a, it's hard to explain this, but there was a tone in that was right for that book. A sort of a kind of monotone with a real pull underneath, that actually that song really makes me cry. So music is what I turn to. But beauty, yeah, of course, it's beauty, it's transcendence, it's something old-fashioned as well, you know, imagination, because without it, it's odd, I'm quoting J.G. Ballard again, because he described himself as an imaginative writer, which is quite odd, isn't it, these days, to kind of say something like that, but I know exactly what he means. It's to do, it's an argument about realism, or against realism, if you like, but not against a psychological realism, things that are felt, and the things that our imagination makes of what makes anew of what is felt. So yeah, absolutely. Rosie, beauty, why not?
Well, hopefully. I mean, Magda, what about you? Do you paint or draw yourself? I know you're, you know, dedicated to art.
I did paint it when I was very, very young, and I was gifted, in fact, to both poetry and visual arts. And finally, I chose to study art history to combine the two. I mean, the literary discourse with the visual discourse. But coming back to your question about beauty, I think that beauty has been denied and almost killed and taken out of modern art, so to speak, in general. And or at least it should have been convulsive, as the surrealists would put it. I mean, there was a kind of hate against beauty, in my opinion, for almost a century. And now, little by little, we rediscover that beauty is an essential energy and force of our being and of reality in general. I mean, look at the younger people. When I was a young poet, I also denied a little bit, you know, beauty. It's just not fashionable, huh? And younger poets and prose writers from Romania today, they do the same thing. They don't like beauty. Beauty has to be discovered in time, with our maturation, so to say. And finally, we can see that beauty is essential to our being, because it brings us harmony. It brings us how to put it. We feel integrated into reality. We are one with the universe via beauty. Beauty is an exceptional way of being together with the world and being present to yourself. So we have
you mentioned surrealism, and I think it'll be interesting for Deborah, because I remember once having a conversation with you when I was interviewing you in Austria. And we spoke about Dada and surrealism, because as you may know, there's a great Romanian Dadaist and surrealist who's actually basically responsible for inventing Dadaism. And I know that you're really interested in that as well too. So, and the whole idea of Romanian writing, it seems to me, from what you've been telling me also, Magda, what I've been reading about you, is that a lot of it came from that kind of, you know, even today comes from that kind of experimental, non-conventional approach to writing. And that's what you're still doing in Romania. And in many ways, I suppose it's what you're both still doing, experimental. And I don't mean that as a negative phrase at all. Is that true, do you think? Is that still something that Romanian writers?
Yes, there is a dimension which I would call absurd or fantastic, or which existed in the Romanian culture even in the 19th century, and Tristan Tzara just took it with him when he left Romania and went to Zurich, and transformed it into a force and dynamite. And it's true that this kind of non-conventional and nihilist manner of approaching life, art, and everything can be revolutionary and cathartic at some moments of history. We need this, like a sort of resetting our criteria and our tastes, our hierarchies and so on. But after a while, we have to remember that beauty is always there. It's like, you know, like the backdrop of our lives, and we have to see it at least from time to time, because it will save us. It will save our soul, first of all.
I think Magda, you'd really enjoy Deborah's short stories, Black Vodka. I mean, there's so much of what you've been talking about in that. And finally, I think, and we haven't had any questions from the audience, by the way. They're obviously far too entranced by what you're both saying, but I'm sure there'll be some comments afterwards. But and please, everyone, do send in your comments afterwards too on the Facebook and various other streams, because it'd be really interesting to know what you think about what Deborah and Magda are saying. But finally, from me, I'd like to ask Deborah, you're a great traveller. You were born in South Africa and you've traveled to so many different places. And I know that you love being in different places. I mean, you spent a long time in the last few years in France, and you're now in Greece. And you're, for me, a great European. You're both great Europeans. Magda's spent a long time in France, which is, for Romanians, I think is a very, is the usual kind of pilgrimage you make. But
yes.
So to Deborah first, and then to Magda at the end as well. To what extent do you think that location and a physical place has an impact on you, obviously personally, but also on your work? Deborah.
Right.
A nice, easy one to end with, you know.
And indeed, Magda, I mean, I think Dada and the surrealism and the surrealists are still subversive, and at times have great struggle in history, where it is absolutely impossible to express your inner thoughts. Surrealism and Dada offer some strategies to hold those subversive forms. Travel, very important is location. I noticed that I've set quite a few of my novels out of Britain.
Yes.
That's partly because I think I got that from Forster and James, who took their British and American characters and put them in Europe or India so that he could scrutinize them more closely because they weren't in their comfort zone and were feeling more vulnerable out of their own habits, you know. But place is incredibly important. A flow of languages, a flow of subjectivity, a flow of cultures, of diverse cultures. All of that is important to my writing. And then I usually have a psychological argument to chase. So in Hot Milk, it's why is the mother hypochondriac? What is her body trying to speak of? What are the awkward things that she can't say that her body can say for her? And so I'll set up a whole novel in the south of Spain, in the desert of the south of Spain, and create a sort of a breast-shaped clinic built from marble with a kind of shaman doctor who's is either a genius or a quack, to try and chase that idea with as many dimensions and bring to it as many dimensions as possible. And the other thing is that, of course, writing, you were talking about beauty, Magda, it is also an entertainment.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other hour.
Yes, indeed. Magda, place and location for you.
Yeah, you know, during communism, I lived in a lockdown country. I couldn't travel, and almost everybody was Romanian in my country, mono-ethnic country, more or less. And after 89, when I started to travel, I had a cultural shock to see in Paris, for example, so many nationalities, so many languages. And I was lost with my little Romanian identity in this melting pot, which was so fascinating for me. And it was not easy. I passed through a kind of identical crisis of identity. I had to reconstruct myself and to say to myself that I can function in another culture, in another country. And I think that this is the best thing that traveling all around the globe can bring to us. That we can understand that we don't need to have only one identity or a strong and fixed one. We can move a little bit, we can change a little bit. Now that I'm in France, I used to live in France for 10 years. I felt almost French, and I was happy with this. And when I came back to Romania, I started to feel more like a Romanian, of course. And when I go to London, I adore London. I'm sorry that I discovered it a little bit late, but nevertheless, I take a little bit of this English spirit, and all this enriches me. And I think that this is very important in this period to have intersections of identities, to accept this enlargement, this instability of our inner definition, so to say, because we are so complex, so rich. We can be several persons or more during one lifetime. And this is the bad point of the actual lockdown, that it stops us from traveling. And this is a loss, and we should regain it afterwards.
Now we're just nearly at the end, but I have got one very special duty at this moment, because Deborah today has won a very important and wonderful prize. And if we were all together in London or wherever, I would be handing you these flowers, Deborah.
Oh.
So congratulations on winning the Femina Prize 2020. Femina L'étranger of the Sous-Sol, so your French, a lovely French prize for you, and these are for you.
Wow, great, great.
That's so appreciated.
Oh, I wish I could give them to you in person. I wish Magda and I could drink a glass of champagne with you, or very good Romanian wine.
And thank you.
Oh, it's actually, I mean, talk about, you know, nourishing our souls within these small, okay, digital frames at the moment, but you two have really given me so much of yourselves, and I know that everybody out there will just want to thank you both, Deborah Levy and Magda Cârneci, so much indeed for your time and your insights and your wonderful, wonderful words. So thank you from me to both of you. Take care, look after yourselves, and see you very soon. Together.
Yeah.
Bye.